Hello, guys. Emily Thornton's wheelchair rolled through the pooling blood on the linoleum floor as Miguel Vasquez pressed the knife deeper into the teenage cashier's throat, his eyes wild with methamphetamine rage and 3 days without sleep. Nobody fucking moves, Miguel screamed, spittle flying from his cracked lips as he dragged 17-year-old Kevin Martinez behind the counter. This is a robbery, but it's about to be a murder if anyone tries to be a hero. The fluorescent lights of Pete's Corner Market buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting sickly shadows across the scene. It was 11:47 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday in suburban San Diego, and what had started as Emily buying groceries for her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, had devolved into a nightmare that smelled of desperation and impending violence. Roberto Santos stood, guard at the front door, his bloodshot eyes scanning the parking lot while his hand shook around a chrome .38 revolver that looked like it had seen better decades. Danny Morrison ransacked the register with the manic efficiency of a man who'd done this before, stuffing crumpled bills into a plastic Walmart bag while muttering Spanish curses under his breath. They weren't supposed to be here. The plan had been simple: wait until the store closed, break in through the back, grab whatever cash was in the safe, and disappear into the maze of strip malls and subdivisions that made up this corner of America's finest city. But Emily's wheelchair had startled Miguel as he jimmied the rear entrance, sending him into a paranoid spiral that transformed a simple burglary into a hostage situation. "Please," Kevin whispered, tears streaming down his acne-scarred cheeks. "I got a baby sister at home. My mom's gonna—" "Shut up." Miguel yanked the knife harder, drawing a thin line of blood. "Nobody asked for your fucking life story." Emily sat perfectly still in her chair, her hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for a bus instead of watching a teenager get his throat slowly opened. Her purple heart pin caught the harsh light, and her army jacket, faded olive drab with carefully maintained creases, hung loose on her diminished frame. To the three criminals, she was just another obstacle, a crippled woman who'd wandered into their disaster at the worst possible moment. They had no idea they'd just trapped themselves in a cage with a predator. Emily's right hand moved with glacial slowness toward her jacket pocket where her fingers found the old Samsung Galaxy, a phone that looked ordinary enough but contained a single app with one button. A button she'd hoped never to press because pressing it meant admitting that Sergeant First Class Emily Thornton, recipient of the Bronze Star with V device, hero of Operation Enduring Freedom, guardian angel of the 307th Engineer Battalion, still needed saving. Miguel noticed her movement and swiveled toward her, the knife leaving Kevin's throat to point in Emily's direction like an accusation. "What the fuck are you doing, Wheels?" "Nothing," Emily said quietly, her voice carrying the kind of calm that came from staring down death so many times it had become a casual acquaintance. "Just sitting here." "Bullshit. You were reaching for something." Miguel's pupils were blown wide and sweat poured down his face despite the store's aggressive air conditioning. "Roberto, check the cripple for weapons." Roberto hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the escalation, but fear of Miguel's unpredictable violence won out. He approached Emily's wheelchair with the awkward shuffle of someone who'd never interacted with a disabled person and wasn't sure of the protocol. "Just stay calm, lady," Roberto muttered, his accent thick with exhaustion and whatever cocktail of substances was keeping him upright. "Nobody wants to hurt you." "The hell we don't," Miguel snarled, pressing the knife back against Kevin's throat. "This bitch has been staring at me like she knows something. Probably already called the cops." Danny looked up from the register, his hands full of small bills and food stamps. "Shit, Miguel, maybe we should just grab what we can and—" "No," Miguel's voice cracked like a whip. "I'm tired of running from these people. Tired of being treated like garbage while they hand out benefits to fake heroes and government leeches." He gestured toward Emily with the knife. "Look at her, sitting there all quiet and dignified. Bet she gets more money from Uncle Sam every month than we make breaking our backs." Roberto's hands shook as he reached toward Emily's jacket. "Just checking for phones, okay? Don't want any trouble." Emily looked up at him with eyes the color of winter storms, eyes that had seen roadside bombs tear through convoys, watched friends bleed out in Afghan dust, stared into the muzzle flashes of Taliban fighters who wanted nothing more than to send her home in pieces. Eyes that had learned to measure death in milliseconds and found Roberto Santos wanting. "Go ahead," she said softly. "Check." Roberto's fingers brushed against her pocket, and Emily's hand moved like lightning, not to stop him, but to press the button on her phone one final time before he could take it away. The screen lit up with a single word: activated. 26 minutes later, the parking lot of Pete's Corner Market looked like a war zone preparing for invasion. Miguel was getting twitchier by the minute, the knife dancing dangerous patterns near Kevin's jugular as he rambled about government conspiracies and stolen jobs. Danny had given up on the register and was now forcing the elderly customer from produce, a Korean War veteran named Harold Kim, who'd been buying his late wife's favorite tea, to empty his wallet at gunpoint. $43 fucking, Danny spat, waving Harold's crumpled bills. "That's it? What kind of cheap-ass—" The sound of diesel engines cut through his complaint like a buzzsaw through balsa wood. Roberto peered through the rain-streaked windows at the parking lot where headlights were arranging themselves in a pattern that looked disturbingly tactical. "Miguel, we got company." "Cops?" "No. Something else." The first vehicle was a black Chevy Tahoe with government plates, followed by two Ford F-150s that moved with the mechanical precision of a convoy expecting contact. As the engines shut down in synchronized silence, 6 figures emerged from the vehicles and began moving toward the store with the unhurried confidence of people who knew exactly how this was going to end. Miguel pressed himself against the window, trying to get a better look at their uninvited guests. "Who the fuck are these guys?" The man leading the group stood 6'4", his gray sweater stretched across shoulders that belonged in the NFL. His left leg was clearly prosthetic, high-tech carbon fiber and titanium that clicked against the asphalt with each measured step. Behind him came 5 others, a Hispanic woman in marine dress blues with combat medic insignia, a black man leaning heavily on a walking stick, a blonde woman whose right arm was entirely cybernetic, 2 more men whose scars told stories. They'd never speak aloud in polite company. They moved like wolves, patient, coordinated, absolutely lethal. Shit, Roberto whispered, backing away from the window. "Those are military, man, real military." "How can you tell?" Danny demanded. "The way they walk, the way they're spacing themselves." "My cousin was Marines. They move different from regular people." Miguel's paranoia ratcheted up another notch. "It's a setup. The cripple called them somehow." He yanked Kevin's head back, exposing more of his throat to the knife. "This was a fucking trap." Emily finally spoke, her voice cutting through the panic like a scalpel through infected tissue. "It's not a trap. It's an intervention." The 6 figures outside arranged themselves in a semicircle around the store's entrance, not moving to enter, but making it clear that leaving was no longer an option. The big man in the gray sweater removed his baseball cap, revealing close-cropped gray hair and eyes that had seen too much combat to ever be surprised by civilian violence. He gestured toward the store's security camera, then held up his phone. The screen clearly visible through the window. A single message appeared in block letters. Miguel read the words and felt something cold crawl up his spine. "What the hell does that mean?" Emily turned her wheelchair to face him directly, and for the first time since the robbery began, Miguel saw her clearly. Not the disabled victim he'd assumed, not the government leech he'd constructed in his meth-addled imagination, but a soldier who'd walked through hell and come back carrying her dead. "It means," Emily said quietly, "that you picked the wrong night to threaten children in front of their mother." The temperature in Pete's Corner Market seemed to drop 10 degrees as the implications of Emily's words sank in. Miguel's knife hand began to shake. Not from drugs this time, but from the growing realization that he'd stumbled into something far beyond his comprehension. "You're lying," he whispered, but his voice carried no conviction. Emily's phone, now lying on the floor where Roberto had dropped it, buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID read, "Tank. Echo Actual." "Answer it," Emily said. Miguel stared at the phone like it was a live grenade. No fucking way. Answer it or I will. Something in Emily's tone, the absolute certainty, the complete lack of fear, made Miguel realize that refusing wasn't really an option. With shaking fingers, he picked up the phone and pressed the speaker button. "Sergeant Thornton," came a voice like gravel mixed with broken glass. "This is Tank. We're outside. Status report." Emily never took her eyes off Miguel. 3 hostiles, 1 with a blade to a civilian's throat. Robbery gone wrong, escalated to hostage situation. They're scared, high, and making bad decisions. Roger that. Recommend immediate de-escalation. We have the perimeter secured. Miguel's face went white. "Who the hell are you people?" The voice on the phone answered before Emily could. "Staff Sergeant Michael Patterson, 3rd Infantry Division. The woman you're threatening saved my life in Helmand Province. Carried me 2 clicks through sniper fire after my squad got hit by an IED. Lost both her legs pulling me out of a burning." "Bradley." Another voice joined the call, female with a slight accent. "Hospital Corpsman 2nd Class Maria Santos, Navy Medical Corps. She stayed with me for 8 hours after our convoy got hit. Kept pressure on my wounds, kept me talking, so I wouldn't bleed out waiting for medevac." More voices followed, each telling the same story from different angles. How Sergeant Emily Thornton had been their squad leader, their protector, the woman who brought them home when everyone else thought they were dead. How she'd earned the Bronze Star by single-handedly holding off a Taliban assault while evacuating wounded civilians from a school. How she'd lost her legs not in some random IED blast but throwing herself on a grenade to protect a group of Afghan children. "She never talks about it." Tank's voice continued through the phone speaker. "Never mentions the Bronze Star. Never talks about the Purple Heart. Never tells anyone she spent 14 months at Walter Reed learning to walk again. Just came home, got a job helping other broken soldiers, and tried to disappear." Miguel looked at Emily with new eyes, seeing for the first time the woman who'd walked through fire and come back steel. "We didn't know. You didn't want to know," Emily said quietly. "Easier to see me as a victim than to recognize what I gave up for people like you." Danny, who'd been silent throughout the phone conversation, suddenly spoke up. "Lady, we're sorry. We didn't mean for this to get so crazy. Miguel's been awake for 3 days and we're all broke and you thought robbing a corner store was the solution?" Emily's voice carried no judgment, just tired understanding. "How'd that work out for you?" Outside, Tank's voice carried clearly through the store's thin walls as he addressed his team. "Echo Squad, this is actual. We have visual on 3 subjects, 1 civilian in immediate danger. Rules of engagement are weapons free if the hostage is harmed. Otherwise, we wait for Sergeant Thornton's command." Miguel's hand started shaking so badly that the knife wavered away from Kevin's throat. "This is insane. We're just trying to rob a store. We're not terrorists." "No," Emily agreed. "You're not. You're just 3 scared men who made a series of increasingly bad decisions. But here's the thing about consequences. They don't care about your intentions." Roberto, who'd been growing more agitated by the minute, suddenly bolted for the back exit. He made it 3 steps before discovering that Echo Squad's tactical positioning extended beyond the front of the store. The rear door flew open, revealing the woman with the cybernetic arm standing in the rain like an avenging angel. "Going somewhere?" she asked pleasantly as Roberto stumbled backward into the store. "Maria Gonzalez," the woman identified herself as she stepped inside, water dripping from her jacket. "EOD specialist, lost this." She flexed her artificial fingers. "Disarming a bomb that would have killed a school full of kids. You know what I learned from that experience?" Roberto shook, his head too terrified to speak. "That there are 2 kinds of people in the world. Those who run toward danger to protect others and those who create danger to benefit themselves." Her cybernetic hand closed into a fist that could probably punch through concrete. "Guess which category you fall into?" The situation was deteriorating rapidly and everyone in the store could feel it. Miguel's meth-fueled paranoia was spiking. Danny was having what looked like a panic attack and Roberto had just discovered that escape was no longer an option. Kevin continued to bleed slowly from the shallow cut on his throat, his eyes wide, with terror as he tried to remain perfectly still. Emily made a decision. "Miguel," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a command from God. "Look at me." Despite himself, Miguel obeyed. "I know what it's like to be backed into a corner with no way out," Emily continued, her words carrying the weight of absolute truth. "I know what it feels like when the whole world seems designed to crush you, when every door slams shut, when every option leads to more pain." Miguel's knife hand wavered. "I also know that there's always a choice. Always. Even when it doesn't feel like it." Emily's eyes never left his. "The question is, what kind of man do you want to be when this is over?" "I don't want to hurt anybody," Miguel whispered, and for the first time he sounded like what he really was, a scared kid who'd gotten in way over his head. "Then don't," Emily said simply. "It's not that easy. If I let him go, if we give up, we're going to prison. Real prison, not county jail. I can't do that again." Emily nodded slowly. "Prison's hard, but you know what's harder? Living with the knowledge that you murdered a 17-year-old kid because you were too scared to face the consequences of your choices." Outside, Tank's voice carried through the walls again. "Sergeant Thornton, we have additional units arriving. San Diego PD is establishing an outer perimeter, but they're holding back on your word." Emily keyed the phone. "Tell them to stay back. We're making progress." "Roger that. But Emily..." Tank's voice carried a note of concern that only came from years of shared combat. "Don't sacrifice yourself for these assholes. You've given enough." Emily smiled for the first time since entering the store. "Not sacrifice, Tank. Teaching moment." She turned back to Miguel. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to put down the knife and step away from Kevin. Danny's going to put down the gun. Roberto's going to sit down and wait for the police, and then we're all going to walk out of here alive." "And then what?" Miguel demanded. "They arrest us, we go to trial, we get 20 years? Maybe," Emily admitted. "Or maybe you get a lawyer who points out that this was robbery, not murder. Maybe you get treatment for whatever's in your system. Maybe you get a second chance to make better choices. Why would you help us after what we did to you?" Emily was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of every hard-won lesson she'd learned in a lifetime of walking through fire. "Because 15 years ago I was in a forward operating base in Afghanistan, and we got word that Taliban fighters were using a school as a weapons cache. Command wanted to call in an airstrike, level the whole building, but there were kids inside, little kids who didn't understand why American soldiers were pointing guns at their school." She paused, remembering. "I had a choice. Follow orders and let those children die, or disobey a direct command and try to get them out. I chose to go in. Lost both my legs and 3 of my best friends in the process, and you know what I learned?" Miguel shook his head. "That the hardest choices are usually the right ones, and that everyone deserves a chance to choose courage over fear, even when the odds are impossible." The knife in Miguel's hand began to lower slowly, as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Especially," Emily added quietly, "when someone's watching who's young enough to learn from your example." She gestured toward Kevin, whose young face was a mask of terror and confusion and desperate hope. "That kid's going to remember this night for the rest of his life. The question is, what lesson are you going to teach him?" Miguel looked at Kevin, really looked at him, and saw not an obstacle or a liability, but a 17-year-old boy who worked nights to help support his family, who had dreams and fears and people who loved him. A kid who deserved better than to die because 3 grown men couldn't figure out how to solve their problems without violence. The knife clattered to the floor. Kevin collapsed against the counter, sobbing with relief as he pressed his hands to his bleeding throat. Danny dropped his gun like it had suddenly caught fire. Roberto sank to his knees, finally understanding that his choices had led him to a place where even surrender was a form of victory. Emily keyed her phone one last time. "Tank, this is Echo 6. All hostiles have surrendered. Send in the cavalry." 3 weeks later, Pete's Corner Market reopened with a new sign by the front door. "Here, a U.S. Army veteran de-escalated a hostage situation without firing a shot. We honor service in all its forms. The San Diego Union-Tribune ran a feature story about the incident under the headline Echo Squad, When Veterans Answer the Call. The article included interviews with all 6 members of Emily's former squad, detailing their service records and the night that brought them together at a suburban grocery store turned crisis zone. Miguel Vasquez pled guilty to armed robbery and assault charges, receiving a sentence of 8 years with the possibility of parole in 5. He'd been clean for 3 weeks and was participating in the prison's veteran outreach program, not because he'd served, but because Emily had arranged for Tank Patterson to visit him once a month. Danny Morrison and Roberto Santos received similar sentences. Danny was learning to read in prison, something he'd never managed in 43 years of life, and Roberto was working toward his GED. Kevin Martinez returned to work at Pete's Corner Market, but now he kept a photo of Emily and Echo Squad taped to his register, a reminder that heroes come in all forms, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon is the willingness to see someone else's humanity, even in the darkest moments. Harold Kim, the Korean War veteran who'd been robbing during the incident, had become Emily's weekly tea companion. They met every Tuesday at the VA hospital, where Emily volunteered and Harold shared stories about his late wife. What the newspaper article didn't mention, what nobody except Emily knew, was that there had never been an Echo Squad emergency response system. No high-tech app, no military-grade communication network, no sophisticated coordination protocol. She had simply texted Tank Patterson. Being robbed at Pete's Market on Hillcrest. 3 guys with weapons. Kids in danger. Need help now. The rest, the coordinated arrival, the military precision, the psychological warfare conducted through speakerphone, had been pure improvisation by 6 people who loved her enough to drop everything and drive across the city because she asked. But even that wasn't the whole truth. The real truth was that Emily had been planning to kill herself that night. She'd bought the groceries for Mrs. Chen as a final act of service. A way to make sure her elderly neighbor wouldn't go hungry while Emily's body was being discovered. The pills were already waiting in her apartment. Enough Percocet to stop the phantom pain forever, to silence the screaming nightmares, to end the crushing weight of survivor's guilt that had made every day since Afghanistan feel like borrowed time. She'd been reaching for her phone not to call for help, but to delete the evidence of her intentions, the suicide note saved in her drafts, the recorded goodbye messages for each member of Echo Squad, the detailed instructions for her funeral that specified no military honors because she didn't deserve them. But when Miguel pressed that knife to Kevin's throat, when she saw the terror in a 17-year-old boy's eyes, Emily Thornton had remembered something she'd forgotten in the long dark months since coming home. That her life wasn't hers to take. That her death would be one more casualty of a war that had already claimed too many good people. That somewhere, somehow, there were still people who needed her to choose courage over despair. So instead of deleting her suicide note, she'd texted Tank. Instead of ending her story, she'd started a new chapter. Instead of surrendering to the darkness that had been stalking her for 3 years, she'd chosen to stand up one more time and fight. Not for herself, but for a scared kid who reminded her why the fight was worth it. The miracle wasn't that Echo Squad had come when called, though that was miraculous enough. The miracle wasn't that she'd talked 3 desperate criminals into surrendering without bloodshed, though that was close to impossible. The miracle was that Emily Thornton had discovered in the worst possible moment that she still had reasons to live. That she still had battles worth fighting. That heroes don't get to choose when their watch ends. They only get to choose how to use whatever time they have left. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's enough to change everything. Bye.